Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. For me, it's been roughly 24 hours since I've had to absorb the information that I got from the ending of Dragon Ball Daima, the finale. Last episode aired roughly about 26 hours ago for me. I just wanted to say that obviously I was quite harsh on it yesterday and I do have my critiques of the series, but with anything, we absorb it and we move on. What I say by absorb is you absorb what you see on screen, you accept it, you can't change it, getting mad about it does nothing. My opinions are my opinions on the show at the end of the day, but today I just thought I'd do a more positive video. We all love Dragon Ball as a series, as a whole, we enjoy Dragon Ball, so I thought I would make up my own version of events and how I view the series. Now obviously, any way you try and fit Dragon Ball Daima into the timelines, whether you pick the Super timeline or the GT timeline, there is a little bit of mental gymnastics involved, but it more so for me fits into the GT timeline now if you ignore the events of Dragon Ball Super. Now we know that Dragon Ball GT does not acknowledge the Gods of Destruction and what happened in the 10-year time skip between the end of the Majin Buu arc and the end of Z. So if GT does not acknowledge that and Daima takes place prior to that 10-year time skip, you could almost argue that Daima takes place in the same timeline as GT, with Super Saiyan 4 now existing. Now, we do have to also mention that the Supreme Kais and the other universes were mentioned in Daima, so that is a little bit of a point against GT fitting into Daima and vice versa. We did see that the Kais left the Demon Realm and that the person who created the different universes derived from the Demon Realm, and that was a plot point in Daima. However, with that one plot point aside, Dragon Ball GT essentially fits into Dragon Ball Daima, and more so you'd have to argue than Super, with Goku now having Super Saiyan 4 and saying that he basically thought he had the power within him, that he could unlock it through training and never using magic to give him the push he needed to unlock that form. If he does in fact have that form in Super, well, you would have to argue against that because there is certain plot points in Super, in the manga and in the TV series, where we can see that Goku straight out states that prior to him earning God Ki and using the God forms, he states that Super Saiyan 3 is his strongest form. There's no mention of this. Now, obviously, in universe, we know that, he's got Super Saiyan 3 saying this is his strongest form, and we know out of universe, in real life, that Daima came after Super, and that's why this is the case. We also know that Kibito Kai is no longer a single being, that Kibito and the Supreme Kai Shin are two separate beings in Daima, and that in both GT and in Super, that they are fused once again. So that same plot point or plot hole exists in both Super and GT, so it's really a point against both. We do know that in Super they defuse again during the God of Destruction Champa Universe 6 versus Universe 7 tournament. They explain in the anime that they used the Dragon Balls to defuse, and that would line up again with what Daima has on screen. However, it doesn't explain why they're defused in Daima and then why they are refused at the start of Super. So as I mentioned, it doesn't line up in Super and it doesn't line up in GT. Really, the only plot point you have against GT is the whole mentioning of there being multiple universes, and that's it. GT can essentially ignore the 10-year time skip, what happened in that 10-year time skip, and Daima can just go straight from what we see on screen in the finale, right on till the end of Z, and then straight on into GT. Because the 10-year time skip doesn't line up with Daima at this stage. Now that is at this stage. Obviously, down the track, there could be a season 2 of Daima. Or Toyotaro could release more manga and write Super Saiyan 4 into the Dragon Ball Super continuity. Okay, so these are things we have to consider. But as of right now, I would place Daima, as you can see there, in the main timeline. You've got Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Daima, and then Dragon Ball GT. Now, this is my opinion. You have to keep this in mind. I'm not saying this is fact. This is how I deal with it mentally, or do the mental gymnastics. Take my copium pills, whatever you want to call it. This is where I place Daima in the Dragon Ball timeline. You could also place it in the Super timeline if you're that way inclined. I just think that there's more points for Daima fitting into GT with all that happens in the 10-year time skip of Super than it fitting into Dragon Ball Super. I think Dragon Ball Super contradicts Daima too much for it to fit. I've mentioned the plot points that are against both, but taking those out or basically explaining them away by saying, the Supreme Kai has to refuse with Kibito in both continuities, or acknowledging that there are the different universes in Dragon Ball GT, they just never really meet the Gods of Destruction. That's a plot point that can be obviously explained away. In that timeline, the GT timeline, the Gods of Destruction never showed up. God Ki was never introduced. That's pretty key there for GT fitting in. Now, I mentioned previously about the canon debate. This is why all anime is canon to Dragon Ball. And you can see that here on this diagram that I've created. All of the anime has contradictions to each other. All of it. You could pick a single point here on the screen, a single title. Let's look at Dragon Ball Super Broly. It contradicts and retcons Bardock, the TV special from the original 291 episode run of Dragon Ball Z. Now in the Dragon Ball Z 291 broadcast airing, there was 2 TV specials. One of those was a 40-minute Bardock episode. That's contradicted in Dragon Ball Super Broly. So every single one of these contradicts each other in a way. So you can't sit here and say, okay, well, this is the canon. No, there's no canon. The only canon you see is at the bottom of the screen. You see those books, the box sets? I own those box sets personally. That's the only canon, if you want to get technical. If you really want to get super technical, it's just Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, which is all just called Dragon Ball in Japan. But we have to really include Super because people just can't cope without Super being involved. So Super's there. I've put it in with the books because it is in book format and Toriyama was involved. Toriyama's passed away now, so anything that Toru Taro creates is creating by himself. So you have to keep in mind that if you're using the logic that only what Toriyama touches is canon, then nothing that is created from this point on is canon. And also, Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods, the movie that many people love, which started the Dragon Ball Z Renaissance when it came out. I would argue Dragon Ball Z Kai did that, but Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods is, kind of hyped up as what brought Dragon Ball back on the map. That was not written by Toriyama. Edits to the script were made by Toriyama with character names and such, and you consider that canon for the most part. So there's no reason you can't consider Dragon Ball GT, which he made character designs for, as canon. Now, the top is obviously the movie timeline. I think the movie timeline is its own continuity. I think everyone can accept that the movies up the top are their own continuity, okay? Now, there's also the fact that GT does take elements from the movies, such as the Dragon Fist and things like that. Or you would see Cooler on screen during the Super 17 arc. You see Cooler coming out of hell. Now, those elements are put in GT. But again, you can find plot holes in any of these franchises, in any of these animes. You can find plot holes. The only one that really sticks rather true to its manga is Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball doesn't have really any significant contradictions to the manga. I've also put Dragon Ball Kai on there because I think Dragon Ball Kai is a fantastic way to watch the show. So that's why that's there. If you're wondering why I've put a timeline with Dragon Ball Kai, you don't always have to watch Dragon Ball Z. If you would rather watch the show in English, I'm sorry, the original dub, in my opinion, this is my channel, I give my thoughts, the original dub of Dragon Ball Z in English is absolute trash. It really is. The voice acting is terrible. The music does not fit the tones of the show. And even the voice actors such as Chris Sabat and Sean Schemmel have come out and said Kai is a superior dub and they are much happier with their work on that show with all the years of experience they'd gained at that point. I also would have to say that, GT is not on that timeline with Dragon Ball Kai for me because if you want to watch it in English, I would just not watch GT in English. I would watch Dragon Ball in English because it's not that bad. It's not as good as the Japanese dub because they take out the insert songs in certain parts. The voice acting, honestly, is not as good as the original Japanese dub, but the dialogue changes aren't as egregious as they are in Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball GT. So Dragon Ball in English would be fine. Dragon Ball Kai, Dragon Ball Z Kai, whatever you'd prefer to call it. And then you could go on and watch Super or the Battle of Gods and Resurrection of F movies onto starting at the Universe 6 versus Universe 7 arc where Champa shows up. You could watch Battle of Gods and Resurrection of F and then go on to there. Now again, I know Beerus mentions in Battle of Gods the movie that he's only using 70% of his power. Like I said, there's plot holes in every single one of these franchises. You can sit here and nitpick it to death. This is how I deal with it mentally when I look at it. Okay? So, I basically have placed Daima, pardon me, in the same timeline as GT. Because it fits into GT more, not acknowledging the 10-year time skip, and not acknowledging God Key, than it does into Super at this stage. Now, obviously, again, GT, there's things that don't line up. Oh, Goku should know about Super Saiyan 4 in GT. Look, maybe there's just, he didn't have a way to unlock it. Maybe it's the same for Super. Maybe Super, he didn't have a way to unlock it. And it'll get explained in the manga later. Okay? The fact it's never mentioned, though, the fact that Goku says Super Saiyan 3 is his strongest form prior to unlocking Super Saiyan God, these are plot points against Daima fitting into Super. Okay? And we have to accept that. It's more likely it fits into GT because of the fact that Super Saiyan 4 actually exists in GT at this point. Now, if you have any counterpoints below, that's fine. Just remember, there is no canon in the anime. These are all their own timelines. And even you could go a step further and make another timeline on the screen here showing Dragon Ball Z, and then Dragon Ball Daima with no GT and no Super. That's another way you can make it fit. Okay? But with Super Saiyan 4 actually existing in GT and Goku using it in a different way, because it's unlocked in a different way in GT, you got to remember that. It's not unlocked through magic in GT. It's unlocked through Goku re-obtaining his tail now that he's got these high levels of power by mastering Super Saiyan 3. And he is able to transform into a Golden Uzaru, which is the old anime, basically the old anime transformation of Legend, where we see Vegeta explaining the Super Saiyan back on Namek. It has a silhouette of a Golden Uzaru. It's kind of a throwback to that. Goku remembers who he is as a Golden Uzaru. Pan is his trigger. He wants to save his family and friends. The Earth is there as another trigger. He transforms into a Super Saiyan 4. It's a different way of unlocking the form. Or it's a different Super Saiyan 4. But at least it acknowledges Super Saiyan 4 GT. Super does not at this stage. So we'll see what happens in the future. But at the moment, that's how I would mentally do the gymnastics to have Daima fit into the Dragon Ball lore. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine. These are my thoughts. At the end of the day, this is my channel. I give my own thoughts on controversial Dragon Ball topics. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Feel free to comment. Please subscribe. Thank you for watching. Share the video around. I'd love to have more eyes on this video as I put quite a bit of thought into it. And I'll talk to you guys later.